Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this fascinating 30-minute webinar on leading an intergenerational workforce. We are delighted that you have chosen to join us this morning. This webinar is being put on by the National Conflict Resolution Center. We are an organization that helps organizations, communities, schools, governments, businesses really lead through difficult issues in workplaces with effective leadership strategies, communication strategies, and conflict resolution strategies. And we began this webinar series about a year or so ago to really help equip workplace leaders and employees navigate through the difficult issues that we all find ourselves facing in today's workplace. We acknowledge that today's workplace looks a lot different than it did 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. And we are frequently dealing with new issues coming up in the workplace that we haven't had to figure out how to work with before and to navigate around. And one of those issues is the fact that we are dealing with the most generations in a workplace than we've ever seen before. And that comes with a lot of benefits, and really some wonderful things come out of that. And it also comes with its share of challenges. And so we're going to dive into that topic today and really leave you with some practical tips and tools. My name is Ashley Virtue. I am the Director of External Relations for the National Conflict Resolution Center. And part of my job is to help people understand who NCRC is, what work we're doing, and how we can best serve businesses around the country, helping, again, kind of get through some of these issues. I am so fortunate today to be joined by Dr. Megan Gerhardt. She is a professor of management and leadership at the Farmer School of Business at Miami University. But maybe more significant to this conversation, she is the author of the book Gentelligence, a revolutionary approach to leading an intergenerational workforce. Gentelligence, her book, has been featured in NBCnews.com, The Washington Post, The Chicago Tribune. The list goes on and on and on. It's amazing. But what's really exciting is that just this last week, Harvard Business Review listed it as one of their 10 must-reads, which is wonderful. And if you haven't checked out the book yet, you will know why when you do. She's also done a TEDx talk called Why I Love Millennials, and you should too. And that is also just wonderful to see. And so her work really focuses on leveraging differences to achieve impact. And we're going to hear more from her now as she gives us a little bit of an overview of the current intergenerational workforce, its impact on businesses and relationships, and how this presentation will look at solutions differently. And so we'll get a little bit of an overview from Megan now, and then she and I will do a bit of an interview as we work through some of the questions that I think we're all thinking about when it comes to this topic. So Megan, take it away.
Thank you, Ashley, and hello, everyone. As Ashley said, so much to dig into here. I want to start by just recognizing that we all work in a multi-generational organization. I work with industries across the world, speaking, consulting, doing workshops, and it is a challenge and an opportunity that we're seeing globally. And although it's a kind of difference that all organizations have, we are seeing that very few organizations really feel like their leadership knows what to do to leverage and really make the most out of that multi-generational workforce. So that's what we're hopefully here to change today, or at least get started on giving you some tools to move this dynamic in a different direction. Right now, we have a very interesting dynamic in the workplace that is, as we'll talk about in a little bit, is more multi-generational than we've ever seen before. But we also have this very unique situation where generational differences in the workplace have historically been painted through a very negative lens. When you talk to people about generational differences, it's usually done through the lens of shaming. It's done through the lens of really mocking other generations for the ways that they're different. And it's looked at more as a frustration than it is an opportunity. And there is a cost to that. You can see there on the screen that research shows us that generational diversity, which really is a form of diversity, if it's not well managed, like other forms of really poorly managed diversity, really can be damaging in the ways that you see. We don't do a good job with knowledge transfer. It increases turnover at every age, whether that's our older generations feeling devalued and nudged out, our youngest generations not feeling connected, or people like myself in between who are trying to figure out where we fit in this dynamic. So it really affects us in many ways that we don't think about. And it really comes down to the fact that people are not going to be engaged and they're not going to remain in places where they don't feel valued, regardless of age. But generations are certainly a part of that. This is the generation gap I really want to talk about, that we have this wonderful kind of valuable difference in perspective and experience in our multi-generational workforces, but no one seems to know what to do about it. If we are talking about it, we're talking about it in a pretty negative way, and it's costing us more than we realize. So those are the things I really want to focus on in the time we have today. And just as importantly, I want to talk about a few things that we aren't going to really focus on, or things that I'd like people to stop talking about. First and foremost, generational stereotypes. So if you tuned in today thinking I was going to pop up a slide with your generation and its years and tell you 3 things that happened to you and the 2 attitudes you have and then the way you behave as a result, that is not the work that I do. We've all been to that generational workshop, and that is not productive. That is what I call lazy generational work. I can't tell you who you are by you telling me the year you're born. That's kind of what we use horoscopes for, not social science. But instead, I want us to start thinking about generational diversity as a very complex and rich and fascinating kind of difference through the lens of what I call gentelligence. So as Ashley said, gentelligence is the name of our book, but it is really more of a strategy and a way of thinking and a way of being smarter about how we have intergenerational conversations. It's about the kind of what I call collective intelligence that's possible when you combine the insights, the perspective, the experience of people who have grown up at significantly different times than you. That comes with different tools we learn. It comes with different ways of thinking and different ways of thinking about work and how to approach it. And that's all potentially a real asset if we change the way we're thinking about it and see generational diversity as an opportunity rather than a threat. And then the last thing I'm going to say before we get to questions is that anyone who's felt maybe disconnected from generations as a kind of identity, I want us to start thinking about this in a more broad way. So I truly believe that generations are a helpful lens for us to understand. I do think it's important to recognize that, for example, my son, who's 18, he's growing up in an entirely different world than the one I grew up in. The things he needs to figure out and the way he's thinking about work and the world and his place in it are fundamentally different than how I felt at 18. But there's other layers of your identity that matter as well. So generations don't exist in a vacuum. When we talk about your generational experience, we also have to mix in things like your age. A lot of people will say, well, I'm a millennial, but I'm an older millennial, or I'm a baby boomer, but I'm a younger baby boomer. So age, gender, where you are in the world, socioeconomic status, religion, all of those things, race, we can continue to add those layers. And allowing people to understand that generation's just one layer of who they are, I think opens up a much, much richer conversation. So those are the things I told Ashley I absolutely wanted to start with, just to set this foundation. And happy now, Ashley, to go ahead and start with some questions.
Well, and I love the concept of really being aware of staying away from those lazy stereotypes, as you call them. I think that comes with any kind of inclusive communication, thoughtfulness that we do. I know at NCRC, we have a workshop called The Art of Inclusive Communication. And that is such a big principle, is to just watch out for those biases and those stereotypes that we make, because it just gives us this preconceived platform that we're going into these conversations with. So I can really appreciate that, and really appreciate that we're looking at so many aspects of someone's identity. With that said, we've seen so much in our Art of Inclusive Communication workshop that this concept of this multi-generational workforce has come up over and over and over again. And we're seeing that even maybe equal to looking at racial diversity in a workplace and gender diversity, this concept of the multi-generational diversity is coming up. So just to get us started in this question, I'm curious, what led us to this place where we have 5 generations of workers for the first time ever, all in the workplace at the same time? And is it the same in other countries around the world, or is this something unique to the US?
Yes. So here is a slide that does summarize the generational categories that we have in our population, specifically in the US. So I do want to say that this is a primarily US centered list, although I speak all around the world, and these categories are relatively similar in Canada, in the UK, and Australia, and a few other places, but not universal by any means. So I'll start with your first question. So why do we have 5 generations in our workplace today, when in the past at most we've had 4? So right now, if you take a look on your screen, I use the generational years established by the Pew Research Center. So I think it's really important when you're doing research to use, standardized timing. So you'll find slightly different years depending on where you look. But right now we have the silent generation through Gen Z in our US workplaces. Only about 3% of the US workforce is the silent generation, and we have about half of our Gen Zs. So Gen Zs are age 11 to 26 this year. So obviously we have the latter half of that generation in our working population. So that's 5 generations. And the reason that that is an increase for us is because people are living longer. We are healthier. We are also seeing people be interested in working longer. And there's a lot of things to dig into there about why that is. Some of it is pure economic necessity, that people may have lost retirement funds during the 2008 economic crisis, during the pandemic, and may not feel like they can stop working maybe as early as they had planned on. But also, maybe even more so, a lot of people in the silent and baby boomer generation as a norm really enjoyed working. They took on a lot of career-based goals, and who they are is largely a part of their career choices at this point. They enjoy work, they feel fulfilled by it, and they don't want to stop working. They feel like they want to work for a longer period than people did in the past. So those dynamics are contributing to having 5 generations, at least for the time being, in our workplace. I think we'll be back to 4 before too long. And that will be the case at least for a few more years as we finish out Gen Z. So that's the answer, Ashley, about why we have 5 right now. It's sort of a demographic reality. And then your question about globally, generations are a social construction. So when you hear, and our book goes very deep into what I call the narrative, like where does a generation get its name? I would say there's like a committee somewhere where they're deciding this, but it often is just, what sticks in popular culture. Millennials, for example, were called Gen Y for a period of time. We can see obviously Y between X and Z, but that didn't stick the way millennials did. So it's a matter of what really resonates. It's almost like the zeitgeist of a group, an age cohort, what they embrace as their identity, what people believe sort of represents them. So globally, when we think about these titles, probably the best demonstration would be the baby boomers. So the baby boomers are a generation, the only generation recognized by the US Census. And that is because that was a generation purely formed based on when the population in the US went up following World War II. And when it dropped for the first time since World War II, the baby boomer generation was brought to a close in 1964. So the reason I use that one in reference to your question is because there are certainly many places in the world where the population did not go up after World War II. That is only a phenomenon for certain areas of the world. And when the OK Boomer phenomenon came out in 2019, I got a lot of calls from areas across the world where OK Boomer had gone viral, but the concept of a baby boomer was not something they were familiar with. So that's just an example. So that's kind of why we have some of these categories. And then you can see here that right now that's our snapshot. We might see them vary across the globe. But the challenge of generational dynamics is certainly a global one.
Oh, interesting. Thank you so much. Obviously, so part of the reason that we're having this conversation is, as we mentioned at the onset, this comes with a lot of opportunity, but also challenges. We know that we're hearing that, you're hearing it, our office is hearing it from workplaces, as especially I think workplace leaders are trying to navigate through this. What do you think are some of the biggest challenges that come up given such a broad range of ages and experiences and backgrounds all convening at one place?
Yeah, a great question. So I'm not going to go too deep into this one just because we're doing highlights and we want to be mindful of time, but I want to point everybody's attention to that middle box. So we've heard sort of here's the things that are formative experiences for your generation, and here's potentially how they affect people. And that's a very simplex, basic description, as I said, that we want to get away from. But I love talking about that box there in the middle, which is the idea of generational norms. And when we talk about generational norms, we can track those through research. We can say Gen X did this thing at a higher frequency than people before or after their generation. So that's a really comfortable place, I think, to have this discussion. So when you look at generations and why we sometimes experience generational conflict in the workplace, it's often our norms are butting up against each other. So my norm of how to approach a career, or my norm for work-life balance, or my norm for even what something like work ethic means, has been influenced by many things, including the sort of ideas and experiences of my formative years. And, that is what I brought with me into my job and my thinking about my life goals. And that might look very different than somebody who grew up substantially before or after me. And that's often when we get into judgment and clashing. So I thought what might be really interesting, Ashley, is just to show this slide, which is that we get hung up quite a bit on the norms that look different across generations as being right or wrong. But if we could dig one level down, research actually shows us, and this is why Gentelligence matters. We need to be smarter about this. A smarter way to think about it is that across every generation and age, research finds we have universal needs, and those are the needs there on the screen. So we all need to feel respected. But what ends up happening is that we forget that the norms we've learned by growing up in a particular period of time probably mean that how I've learned to get respect in the workplace might look very different than somebody significantly older or younger than me. So the quick, easy sort of way to think about this would be a baby boomer probably learned that the way you get respect at work is you put your head down and you close your mouth and you get your job done, and somebody will come tap you on the shoulder when it's time for your promotion or your raise. But then fast forward to our millennial generation, who are raised to be proactive and to be go-getters, and you're worth it and go for it. The way they earned respect, or were taught to earn respect as a norm, was to get yourself to the front of the line and raise your hand. That's how you get respect. Somebody else will do it if you don't. And that looks entitled sometimes to older generations who don't understand that norm. But both of those things are based on the need for respect. They're different norms we've learned to achieve that. And when we judge other people's norms through our own lenses, we end up creating that conflict instead of digging down to those common areas where we can start to have constructive conversations. So we're seeing this in the areas of things like flexible work, work ethic, giving feedback, mental health at work. We are seeing this in so many important ways that we don't have time to dig into deeply today, but it often goes back to clashing norms.
I love the concept of looking really and focusing more on the shared needs across generations. At NCRC, when we do communications strategies and conflict resolution, we often talk about how we hear complaints all the time. Complaints like, so-and-so from this generation only texts their information to me and I want a conversation, or, but complaints are so surface level. And what we teach so much is looking at the underlying needs in any kind of disagreement or conflict is key to moving forward. And so I so align with what you're saying there. There are actually some really thoughtful questions that have come in via chat, and I'm delighted that I think this next question is going to help answer some of those questions. So we've talked about kind of what led us here and what we're seeing that are the challenges, but Since it doesn't seem this trend is going anywhere, we're going to be working together with multiple generations in the workforce for a long time to come. What are some things that a company can do to help a workforce understand one another better?
So that's key. The how, what are the practices? What are the tools? How do we do this differently? And all of my work and speaking focuses on not the scripts or the broad brush stereotypes. Those don't work. It's about just helping people have smarter intergenerational conversations. So how do we do that? We need a strategy. This does not happen naturally. Like any other kind of difference, if we simply put people from different generations together and cross our fingers, we just get conflict. We don't necessarily get those wonderful benefits that exist on the other side of that conflict. So as you said, we present some of these ideas. If you want more reading on this, this is our Harvard Business Review piece that came out last year. And it really highlights these 4 practices, which I'll take the next few minutes to talk about just at a really high level. So what I wanted to do, knowing this is just a taster of the work that I do on this, is give you a sample of the 4 practices we want people to start integrating into their everyday work interactions. You have to practice them. That's intentionally why we called them practices. And what I've done is I've chosen just one tool for each one to give you today so that you could use later this afternoon to try to start entering into these intergenerational dynamics in a way that's more constructive. So the first one I want to talk about is called identifying assumptions. So this is being careful about those broad brush stereotypes. It's being careful that we're not assuming that somebody is a certain way just simply because we don't know them well. We haven't had an opportunity to really interact. We don't tend to have opportunities to interact with people a lot older than and younger than us at work unless we create those. And so this is diversity 101, being cautious about relying on myths and stereotypes, particularly those perpetuated by the media. Most are false. I'll leave it at that. So I like to give everybody what I'd like to call a power question. So the one I chose for today for this practice is when you hear someone, yourself included, making a generation or age-based assumption or using a stereotype. So this might sound like these young people. I always say that's capitalized. These young people don't want to work or have no work ethic. Or on the flip side, those older people, boomers don't want to use technology. Anything that's that bold and broad brush is almost absolutely false. So the question that's professional, respectful, but also constructive is for you to say, well, is that necessarily true? And then provide a counterpoint. Tyler downstairs in the marketing department, I think he's only 23 and he's really been crushing it in terms of, him really getting this project done before the deadline. Or, Sally has really been interested in learning more about how AI can help her work. And she's one of the oldest employees we have. So just providing that as a counter and in a respectful way that starts a smarter conversation. The second practice we call adjust the lens. And this is what we were talking about earlier, Ashley, where we tend to see the world through our own norms. That's a very natural thing, but we tend to judge norms that aren't ours as wrong. So when we say something like work ethic, we have, really anchoring that what our work ethic is or what we believe work ethic should be. So this is all about being curious and not judgmental. We've all heard that before, and identify those underlying needs or intent rather than judging something that doesn't look like the way we're used to or the way that we would prefer. So the power question on this one is simply, can you help me understand? Someone has their phone out at a meeting. Someone didn't respond to an email. Someone is approaching something in a way that you feel is counterproductive, not values aligned, not how we do things here. Before we judge it, simply stepping back and saying, can you help me understand where you're coming from on this? Or can you help me understand why you're doing this in a way that I didn't anticipate? Helps you get a bigger picture and helps you stay away from the judgment that creates that us versus them polarization that we want to avoid. All right, the last two go hand in hand. And this is, really what effective leadership is about, but it's not something we tend to apply very often to intergenerational dynamics. So if we want to move past bias and tension and into tapping into the diversity of thought, the complementary skills, the learning and collaboration possible with this kind of diversity, we have to strengthen the trust. And that might be tough because you don't naturally trust people that you perceive to be, quote, different than you. You have to work harder at that. I have to believe, regardless of my age and generation, that this is a place where my viewpoint is respected. Someone cares about me. I'm valued here for the unique things I bring. So the power question I gave on this one is really simple. Do you think your talents are being well utilized here? And that might be an opportunity for an older person to say, no, I am actually quite tech savvy and I would love to get up to date on some of the new things that we're thinking about doing. Or a younger person saying, I actually, would love to be able to contribute more in the areas of ideas or innovation, but I don't want to step on anyone's toes. I don't want anyone thinking that I'm entitled. Opening up those conversations is so key. And then the last one, Ashley, is what we call expand the pie. This is this idea of stepping away from generations being in competition and a win-lose, and really recognizing that there's an opportunity there for a mutual benefit. And so we tend to push away and not want to collaborate when we feel threatened. And so if we could understand that learning from people older and younger has the potential to make us better at our work and at our job and to make our organization stronger, I think it really helps us move towards an idea that all generations have something to learn as well as something to teach. So my last power question here, and I know we're getting up to on time, is simply that, asking as an older person on your team, asking a younger person how they would approach a goal, a project, an initiative, can show them respect in a way that makes them feel valued and included and allows them to have voice. And a younger person asking an older person that exact same question of how you would approach this shows respect, shows deference for context and history and wanting to learn. It's one question that can open up such deep, rich intergenerational learning and collaboration and conversation. So I'm going to toss it back over to you to wrap us up.
Thank you so much for that incredible overview. As you are explaining these concepts and thinking about how we can really practically bring this into workplaces, it resonates so much with the principles of conflict resolution and these key communication strategies that we are also bringing to workplaces. And so it's always amazing to connect with amazing other thoughtful people in the country who are helping really transform workplaces. So for all of us that are here today, I think it's just a great time to ask ourselves what we're currently doing to help really create a more inclusive workplace. And again, looking at inclusivity in the broadest sense, including also generations in that. And if you are looking for resources to help your workplace be more inclusive, we have a few for you. The first is that NCRC, the National Conflict Resolution Center, we offer a certificate program that has been developed specifically for workplace leaders to help, again, navigate through some of today's more challenging issues that may have been thrust upon you in ways that you did not expect. Oh my goodness, a Supreme Court decision comes out, and that was never something that was talked about in a workplace. And now all of a sudden, I'm expected to comment on that and to have, a stance on that. And so just to kind of give tools to help you work through that. Also here on this slide is the ability, if you have your iPhone and you just want to scan this QR code, you can have access to our website, where not only will you find a list of workshops and available resources to you, but you will find free resources available to you, just 1 to 2 minute video clips, recordings of webinars that we've done in the past. And yes, this webinar is recorded. We will be sending it out for you to have access to afterward. But there are others that we've done on waning trends in DE&I and pay transparency laws and leading through a polarized workplace. So you can access all of those and all of those resources on our website by scanning that QR code, or you can always email me. And then finally, also want to make sure that you have access to Gentelligence. And so this is an easy link to be able to look up this book where you can take a much deeper dive into these concepts and just learn more from Megan and her incredible team behind the Gentelligence concept. With that, we want to be very respectful of everyone's time on a busy Tuesday. And so I just want to thank you so much for joining us. I ask that you keep your eyes out for any other webinars that we have coming up. Don't miss out. We're always looking for the top issues in the country and where we can be helping you address them. And Megan, I just want to thank you so much for joining us today. It's been such a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Take care, everyone. Thank you.